The first time Maren Ellis saw Luca Ravelli, he was standing beneath a chandelier worth more than every apartment building she had ever lived in, looking at her like she was a mistake he had been waiting years to make. The ballroom had gone silent. Not quiet. Silent. The kind of silence that crawled over skin and made every camera flash feel like a gunshot. Maren stood near the marble staircase of the Valencia Grand Hotel in downtown Los Angeles, one heel broken, one hand trapped in the grip of a security guard twice her size, her borrowed champagne dress torn at the shoulder. Around her, movie stars, tech billionaires, studio executives, and women wearing diamonds large enough to pay for heart surgery stared at her, with the open hunger of people who had just found fresh scandal. She had been hired to pretend to belong here, just for one night. Smile, hold a glass, say she was from old money, pretend she knew which fork touched which course. Take the cash envelope afterward and get home before midnight. That was the job. That was supposed to be all. But now Celeste Arden, the billionaire heiress whose face was printed on magazine covers and charity banners, stood in front of her with champagne dripping from her manicured fingers, her smile sharp enough to cut silk. "Did you think he would hide you forever?" Celeste asked, loudly enough for the room to hear. Maren's breath caught. "I don't know what you're talking about." The crowd laughed softly, cruelly. That laugh would follow Maren for the rest of her life. Celeste stepped closer, her white engagement gown glittering like ice under the ballroom lights. "Of course you don't. Girls like you never know anything. You just appear where wealthy men tell you to appear, wear what they tell you to wear, and open your mouth only when paid." Heat rushed into Maren's face. "I was hired for an event." "Yes," Celeste said. "By him." Every head turned. At the far end of the ballroom, Luca Ravelli did not move. He stood beside a stage, wrapped in black roses and gold ribbon, where only minutes earlier a host had announced that the city's most feared private security magnate and the daughter of the Arden fortune were about to make an announcement that would unite two empires. No one in the room said the word mafia. They never did. Not around Luca Ravelli. They said businessman, investor, security consultant, philanthropist, owner of half the nightclubs, docks, private transport routes, and luxury real estate no one could explain. But everyone knew. Luca Ravelli was the kind of man politicians shook hands with in public and feared in private. The kind of man whose enemies disappeared from boardrooms, court calendars, and dinner parties. The kind of man who wore black like it had been tailored from shadows. His dark hair was swept back. His jaw was calm. His black tuxedo fit like armor. Beneath the clean collar, tattoos curled up the side of his neck in black and gray, vanishing beneath the shirt and reappearing over his hands, like secrets refusing to stay buried. He looked at Maren, not at Celeste, not at the cameras, at her. The guard tightened his grip. "We're removing her, Miss Arden." Maren winced. Luca saw it. Something shifted in his face. It was almost nothing. A slight lowering of his eyes. A stillness deeper than stillness. Then he began walking. The cameras turned first. Then the crowd parted, as if pushed by an invisible blade. Celeste's smile faltered. "Luca," she said softly. Warning in the single word. He did not stop. Maren's heart pounded so hard she could hear it beneath the string quartet, beneath the whispers, beneath the tiny mechanical click of every phone in the room recording her ruin. Luca stopped in front of her. He was close enough that she could smell smoke, cedar, expensive wool, and rain from the storm beginning outside. His eyes dropped to the guard's hand on her arm. "Let go," he said. The guard released her so quickly, Maren almost stumbled. Luca caught her wrist. Not harshly, not gently either. Like he had decided gravity itself was no longer allowed to touch her without his permission. Maren tried to pull back. "I don't know you." His gaze stayed on hers. "Tonight. That becomes unfortunate for both of us." Before she could speak, Luca turned toward Celeste. The entire room held its breath. Celeste's diamond engagement ring glittered on her hand, enormous and cold. Luca looked at it once, then looked down at his own ring, a black platinum band designed to match hers. He removed it. A gasp moved through the ballroom. Maren froze as Luca lifted her trembling hand and placed the ring in her palm. It was warm from his skin, heavy, impossible. Then Luca turned to the crowd, his expression calm enough to be terrifying. "Anyone who insults her," he said, "answers to me." Flashbulbs exploded. Celeste went white, and Maren Ellis, a failed actress with $43 in her checking account, understood with sickening clarity that her life had just been stolen by a man everyone in Los Angeles was too afraid to touch. By sunrise, her face was everywhere. The headline appeared first on a gossip site that usually specialized in celebrity divorces and influencer scandals. "Mystery woman destroys billionaire engagement at charity gala." Then the photos spread. Maren in the champagne dress, looking horrified. Celeste Arden throwing a drink. Luca Ravelli holding Maren's wrist, the ring in her palm. By 7 in the morning, the story had become worse. Secret mistress exposed. Mafia billionaire chooses struggling actress over heiress. Who is Maren Ellis? That last headline was the one that made Maren throw up in her kitchen sink. Her apartment in East Hollywood was small enough that she could stand between the stove and refrigerator and touch both if she stretched her arms. Rain tapped at the window air conditioner. The neighbor's dog barked through the thin wall. A collection notice sat open on the counter beside a bottle of cheap antacids and a hospital bill marked "Final Warning." Her phone vibrated again. Unknown number, unknown number, unknown number. Then a text from her younger sister, Hannah. "Are you okay? Nurses are talking about you. Please answer." Maren wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, shaking. She wanted to answer. She wanted to say yes, she was fine. She had just accidentally been branded the mistress of a criminal in front of half of Hollywood. But not to worry, because the world was probably ending anyway. Instead, she typed, "I'm okay. Stay in your room. Don't talk to anyone about me." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Maren locked the phone before she could read Hannah's reply. Her sister was 19, brave, stubborn, and trapped in a private clinic because the public hospital had wait lists and the private one had specialists. Autoimmune complications, surgeries, experimental medication, words Maren had learned to pronounce because debt collectors respected panic less when it sounded educated. That was why she had taken the job. A woman named Brielle had found her through a background casting agency. Easy money, cash tonight, upscale event, no speaking unless spoken to. Wear this dress, say your name is Marianne Veil if anyone asks. Stand near the donor wall at 9:30. Smile. Maren had asked if it was illegal. Brielle had laughed. "Sweetheart, it's Los Angeles. Pretending to be rich is half the economy." Now Brielle's number was disconnected. The dress was in a wet pile on Maren's bathroom floor, and a black SUV had been parked across the street for 20 minutes. Maren noticed it when the rain lightened. It sat beneath a dead palm tree, engine running, windows dark. Her body went cold. She backed away from the window, grabbed a kitchen knife from the drawer, then immediately felt stupid because the knife was small, dull, and had once failed to cut a lime. A knock sounded at the door. 3 calm hits. Maren's breath stopped. Another knock. Then a man's voice through the wood. "Miss Ellis, Mr. Ravelli sent me." That did not make her feel safer. She held the knife tighter. "Tell Mr. Ravelli I'm calling the police." A pause. "With respect, ma'am, the police are outside too. They're pretending not to be." Maren looked through the peephole. A man in a black coat stood in the hallway, broad-shouldered, empty-handed, patient. Behind him, Mrs. Alvarez from 2B had opened her door 2 inches and was watching with the expression of a woman who had survived 3 husbands and feared nothing but rising rent. "I'm not going anywhere," Maren said. The man lowered his voice. "Someone leaked your address 20 minutes ago." Maren's grip on the knife loosened. Outside, tires hissed over wet pavement. The man glanced toward the stairwell. His expression sharpened. "Miss Ellis," he said, "open the door now." Something slammed downstairs. A shout. Then glass broke. Maren moved before thinking. She unlocked the door. The man pushed inside, shut it behind him, and pressed one finger to his earpiece. West stairwell compromised. Compromised? Maren whispered. What does that mean? It means somebody wants the headline cleaned up before lunch. Her stomach dropped. The man crossed to the window, looked down, and pulled the curtain shut. Bathroom. Now. No. He turned. Miss Ellis. I said no. My sister. A bullet punched through the window. The sound shattered the room. Maren screamed and fell backward as glass burst across the kitchen. The man grabbed her and dragged her into the hall, covering her with his body, while another shot tore through the apartment door. Mrs. Alvarez yelled something in Spanish. People screamed downstairs. Maren couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't understand how one bad acting job had turned into bullets inside her apartment. The man shoved her toward the stairwell, but two figures appeared below, moving fast. He cursed. Then the hallway lights went out. Darkness swallowed everything. A hand closed over Maren's mouth from behind. She fought wildly. Quiet, Luca Ravelli whispered against her ear. The voice froze her. His arm was locked around her waist, pulling her back against a hard chest. She could feel the controlled rhythm of his breathing, steady as a metronome, while her entire world broke apart. Another shot cracked below. Luca moved with terrifying calm, dragging her into Mrs. Alvarez's apartment through the open door. The old woman stood there holding a cast-iron pan like a weapon. About time, she snapped at Luca. Maren stared at her. You know him. Mrs. Alvarez gave her a look. In this city, smart women know who owns the shadows. Luca did not smile. He guided Maren through the apartment and out a back service door she hadn't known existed. Rain hit her face. The alley smelled of wet concrete and gasoline. A black SUV waited with the rear door open. I'm not getting in, Maren said, though her voice shook. Luca looked at her. Behind them, a man shouted from the stairwell. Luca's hand brushed the small of her back. He did not push. He only leaned down until his mouth was near her ear. They found your address in under 6 hours, he said. They found your sister's clinic in 4. Maren stopped breathing. What did you say? His eyes were dark, unreadable. Get in the car, Maren. This time she did. The safe house did not look like a safe house. It looked like a home designed by someone who had no intention of ever feeling at home. Glass walls overlooked the Pacific from a cliff above Malibu, though storm fog blurred the ocean into a dark, endless bruise. The floors were black stone. The furniture was expensive and severe. There were no photographs, no books left open, no throw blankets, no signs of softness anywhere except the fire already burning in the living room. Maren stood near the entrance with bare feet, because her broken heel had finally given up in the SUV. Luca's men moved around her silently. One handed her a towel. Another placed a phone on a table. Another checked the locks on doors that probably cost more than her building. Luca removed his tuxedo jacket. Beneath it, his white shirt was streaked with rain, clinging enough to reveal the dark ink across his chest and shoulders where the collar had loosened. His tattoos weren't decorative. They looked like history written in wounds. Maren hated that she noticed. Where is my sister? She asked. At her clinic, Luca said. 2 of my men are outside her floor. No one gets near her without my permission. Your permission? She laughed once, but it broke halfway. You don't get permission over my life. His gaze moved to her face. No, not yet. The words were quiet, possessive, infuriating. Maren stepped toward him, anger rising, because it was the only thing stronger than fear. You ruined my life in that ballroom. Luca's expression didn't change. Celeste ruined your life. I made sure you survived the first hour after. You put a ring in my hand in front of cameras. I took one alliance off the table. You used me. Yes. The honesty hit harder than a lie. Maren stared at him. You admit it? I don't waste time pretending to be gentle. Her throat tightened. I was nothing to you. At first, the fire cracked behind her. Maren hated the way her heart reacted to those 2 words, as if danger became romance because a beautiful man spoke softly, as if obsession became safety because he stood between her and bullets. She wrapped the towel tighter around herself. I want to leave. No. Excuse me? No, Luca repeated. You are now the most photographed woman in America. The Arden family believes I chose you publicly to humiliate them. My enemies believe you know something valuable. Reporters believe you're my mistress. My men believe you're a liability. And what do you believe? For the first time, Luca looked away. Only for a second, but she saw it. I believe someone planted you in that ballroom, he said. Maren went still. I told you. I was hired. By whom? A woman named Brielle. Last name? She didn't give one. Payment? Cash? Instructions? Maren hesitated. Luca's eyes sharpened. What instructions, Maren? She looked toward the storm-dark glass. To say my name was Marianne Veil, if anyone asked. The room changed. Not visibly. No one moved. No one spoke. But Luca's men stopped breathing. Luca turned fully toward her. Something cold and lethal slid behind his eyes. Say that again. Maren's voice dropped. Marianne Veil. One of his men crossed himself. Luca said nothing. Who is Marianne Veil? Maren asked. No answer. Luca. His name left her mouth before she could stop it. His eyes returned to hers, and for one dangerous second, the room felt smaller. Marianne Veil, he said, has been dead for 7 years. Maren slept behind a locked door with a chair shoved under the handle, and woke to find breakfast waiting on the floor outside, like an offering left for a dangerous animal. Toast, eggs, coffee, a folded black sweater, jeans with the tag still on them. Flat shoes in her size, no note, no explanation. She didn't eat for 20 minutes out of principle. Then hunger won. By noon, the gossip sites had decided she was Luca Ravelli's secret lover. By 1, someone had found her old commercial for a dental insurance company and clipped her line out of context. By 2, a former acting classmate posted a video saying Maren had always been intense and mysterious, which was Los Angeles code for poor and private. By 3, Celeste Arden gave a statement. Maren watched it on the massive television in Luca's living room while 2 guards stood near the doors. Celeste appeared outside the Arden Foundation headquarters in Beverly Hills, perfect in cream wool, eyes bright with practiced pain. I wish Luca and Miss Ellis peace, she said to reporters, voice trembling just enough. But I will not allow a woman with questionable motives to endanger the work my family has done for this city. A reporter shouted, Are you saying Maren Ellis targeted Mr. Ravelli? Celeste lowered her eyes. I'm saying we should all be careful of people who appear at charity events under false identities. Maren's stomach twisted. The clip cut to a photo of Hannah leaving her clinic in a wheelchair 3 months earlier. Maren stood so fast the remote fell. No, she whispered. Luca entered behind her, wearing black slacks and a black shirt open at the throat. He had been gone for hours. Rain clung to his hair. There was a faint bruise across one knuckle. Maren turned on him. They showed my sister. His jaw tightened. They showed my sister, Luca. I saw. You said she was protected. She is. Then why is her face on television? Because Celeste is not trying to kill her yet, he said. She's trying to teach you that she can touch any part of your life. The calmness made Maren want to throw something. So what am I supposed to do? Hide here forever while you have men outside her hospital room? No. Luca walked to the bar, poured a glass of water, and handed it to her. You're going to give the public what they already believe. Maren did not take the glass. Meaning, you and I are going to be seen together. No, Maren, no. Her voice rose. I am not pretending to be your girlfriend because your billionaire ex-fiancé is mad. She was never my fiancé. You were wearing the ring. A ring is not a vow. It is to normal people. I'm not normal people. No, she said bitterly. You're the man who gets to turn women into weapons and call it strategy. Luca's expression hardened. For a moment she thought he would lash out. He didn't. That was almost worse. He stepped closer, stopping just outside touching distance. Celeste's family signed a deal with mine 2 months ago. Ports, security contracts, political protection. Marriage was part of the theater. Last night, someone sent you into that room, using the name of a dead woman connected to my past. Celeste used the moment to humiliate you because she thought you were weak. Now she will escalate because I contradicted her in public. Why? Maren whispered. Luca's eyes lowered to her mouth, then back to her eyes. It was so fast she almost convinced herself she imagined it. Why what? Why contradict her at all? Why not let security drag me out? Silence stretched. Outside, thunder rolled over the ocean. Luca looked at her, as if the answer cost him something. Because you looked at the room like you expected no one to come for you, he said. And I understood that. Maren's anger faltered. She hated him for that too, for seeing something true. My sister needs me, she said, quieter. I moved her to another wing under a private name. Her doctors remain the same. Her bills are paid through the end of the year. Maren froze. What? Don't thank me. It wasn't kindness. It was control. Yes. At least he didn't lie. Maren looked away before he could see tears gathering. You don't get to buy my gratitude. I'm not interested in gratitude. Then what do you want? Luca stepped even closer. This time, Maren did not move back. I want to know who sent you, he said. I want to know why they used Marianne's name. I want Celeste Arden to regret thinking humiliation was safe. And until I have those answers, I want every man in this city to believe touching you is the fastest way to die. Her pulse moved painfully in her throat. That's not romance, she whispered. No, Luca said. It's survival, wearing better clothes. Their first public appearance was at an art auction in West Hollywood, 3 nights after the gala. Maren wore a black velvet dress Luca had sent to her room without asking. It was modest, elegant, and fit perfectly, which annoyed her more than if it had been vulgar. Her hair was pinned back by a stylist who refused to make eye contact. Her makeup made her look composed, which felt like a lie. Luca waited for her at the bottom of the safe house stairs. He looked up when she appeared. The change in him was subtle. A pause, a stillness, his hand flexing once at his side. Maren held the railing. Don't say anything. I wasn't going to. You were looking. I still am. Heat touched her face. She hated that he could do that with 5 words. Outside, rain polished the driveway black. 3 SUVs idled under security lights. Luca opened the middle door for her himself. When she hesitated, his hand hovered near her back but did not touch. That restraint unsettled her more than possession. At the auction, cameras surged like waves. Luca stepped out first. The shouting began. Maren, did you break up the engagement? Luca, are you in love with her? Celeste says she was targeted. Did Maren lie about who she was? Maren's body locked. Luca turned, extended his hand. Every camera caught it. She stared at his palm. Taking it would make the lie real. Refusing would make her look afraid. Luca leaned slightly closer. Breathe. I am breathing. No, you're surviving. There's a difference. She wanted to slap him. Instead, she took his hand. The moment her fingers touched his grip closed around her with quiet certainty. No squeezing. No performance. Just presence. The cameras exploded. Inside the auction hall, the city's elite pretended not to stare and failed completely. The room smelled of orchids, old money, and polished lies. Paintings hung under museum lighting. Champagne moved on silver trays. Security watched security. Luca guided Maren through the crowd, as if she belonged at his side. Celeste was already there. She stood near a painting of a woman in a red veil, surrounded by donors and cameras, dressed in pale gold, like revenge had a stylist. Her smile widened when she saw them. Maren, Celeste said. You look almost comfortable. Maren felt Luca's hand tighten slightly around hers. Almost. She lifted her chin. Years of auditions had taught her one thing. If you were terrified, find the light and let them think it was confidence. Celeste, Maren said, you look almost sincere. A few people nearby went still. Celeste's eyes sharpened. Then she laughed, soft and delighted, like Maren had just performed for her. Luca's mouth almost moved. Not a smile, something darker. Approval, maybe. Celeste noticed. Her expression cooled. Enjoy the attention, she said. Women like you don't usually get invited twice. Luca spoke before Maren could. She wasn't invited, he said. She was brought. The words were calm, but the people around them drifted backward, as if he had drawn a weapon. Celeste looked at him. Careful, Luca. You're beginning to sound attached. His eyes did not leave hers. Careful, Celeste. You're beginning to sound disposable. Maren's breath caught. Celeste's smile vanished. For one dangerous second, the auction hall became a battlefield dressed in silk. Then the lights flickered. Once. Twice. The emergency alarm stayed silent. Luca moved immediately, pulling Maren behind him. His body blocked hers before she even understood the danger. Across the hall, a waiter dropped a tray. Glass shattered. A scream rose near the entrance. A red dot appeared on Luca's chest. Maren saw it before he did. Luca! She grabbed his jacket and yanked with everything she had. The shot cracked through the glass wall behind him. Chaos detonated. People screamed and fell to the floor. Luca shoved Maren behind a marble column, his arm locked across her waist. His men moved like shadows with teeth. Another shot struck the column, spraying stone dust across Maren's cheek. Luca looked down at her, eyes burning. Are you hit? No. Look at me. Are you hit? No. His hand came up to her face, thumb brushing dust from her cheek, before he seemed to realize what he was doing. He stopped. His fingers hovered there, not touching. The world screamed around them. Maren stared at him, heart hammering. Fear and something worse tangled together. You could have died, she whispered. His gaze dropped to her hand still fisted in his jacket. So could you. I pulled you. Yes. You should be thanking me. Luca leaned closer as another shot echoed outside. I'm trying not to touch you, he said. The words landed between them like a confession with blood on its hands. Before Maren could answer, his men surrounded them and moved them through a service corridor. Luca kept his body between her and every open doorway. When one of his guards tried to take her arm, Luca's eyes cut to him. The man stepped back. In the SUV, Maren shook so violently she couldn't fasten her seatbelt. Luca reached across her. She slapped his hand away. I can do it. He let her. It took 3 tries. He watched without speaking. When the car pulled into traffic, she turned toward him. Was that Celeste? No. You know that how? Celeste likes cameras. Whoever fired tonight wanted silence. Maren swallowed. Then who? Luca looked out the rain-streaked window at the city blurring past. Someone who thinks you know why Marianne Veil matters. Then tell me why she matters. His reflection stared back at her from the glass. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he reached into his jacket and removed a photograph. Old, creased, protected in a plastic sleeve. He handed it to her. Maren looked down. The woman in the photo had dark hair, tired eyes, and a small scar near her eyebrow. Maren felt the air leave her body, because the woman looked like her. Not identical, but close enough to make her fingers go numb. Who is she? Maren asked. Luca's voice was low. My brother's wife. The safe house felt different after the auction. More locked, more watched, more alive with things no one said. Luca disappeared into meetings behind closed doors, while Maren sat on the living room floor, surrounded by printed articles about Marianne Veil. She had been an actress too, not famous. Small roles, commercials, a supporting part in an indie film. Then she married Luca's older brother, Matteo Ravelli, in secret. 6 months later, Matteo was dead in a car explosion near the docks. Marianne vanished. The official story said she died 2 weeks later in a fire under another name, but there were no photos of the body, no funeral, no grave. Maren stared at the photograph until the woman's face blurred. A dead actress, a fake name. A gala job, a mafia engagement destroyed on camera. Nothing about her involvement was random. At midnight, she found Luca in the room at the end of the hall. It wasn't an office. It was a surveillance room. Screens covered one wall. Her apartment building, Hannah's clinic hallway, the safe house driveway, news feeds, traffic cameras, the auction hall, and one screen showing Maren asleep in the guest room. Her stomach turned. Luca stood at the console, sleeves rolled to his forearms. tattoos visible up to the elbow. He did not look surprised to see her. "You're watching me sleep?" For threats. "Through a camera in my bedroom?" His jaw tightened. "The camera has no audio." "That's your defense?" "No, that's a detail." Maren walked to the console and slapped the keyboard hard enough to make one of the guards look over. "Turn it off." Luca nodded once. The guard disabled the feed. "Delete anything saved." "It doesn't record. Why should I believe you? Because if I wanted to lie, I'd make it prettier." She hated him. She hated that some part of her believed him. "You don't get to decide safety means owning every inch of my life," she said. His face remained controlled, but his eyes changed. "You're right." That stopped her. Luca turned to the guard. "Remove all cameras from her room. Hallway only. Door exterior only. She approves every security change from now on." The guard nodded and left. Maren stared at him. "Why did you do that?" "Because you asked. No one like you does things because someone asks." "No," he said. "Not usually." Silence settled. The monitors flickered across his face, turning him blue, silver, shadow. Maren crossed her arms, suddenly aware she was wearing one of his black sweaters over leggings, suddenly aware of the way his eyes refused to travel down. "Tell me the truth about Marianne." Luca looked at the screens. "My brother loved her," he said. "Our father hated that. Matteo was supposed to marry into another family. Instead, he married a woman with no name, no money, no protection. Like me." His gaze cut to hers. "Not like you. Because I'm not loved? Because you are alive." The words stole her breath. Luca looked away first. "After Matteo died, Marianne came to me. Pregnant. Terrified. She said the explosion wasn't from our enemies. It came from inside the family. She had proof. Names. Accounts. A ledger that could destroy men still sitting at tables with me today. What happened to her? I hid her. And then, he went still. And then I failed." Maren's anger softened despite herself. "She died? I thought so." "You thought so." His hand closed around the edge of the console. 2 weeks after I moved her, the safe apartment burned. They found remains. A woman. No child. The room felt suddenly colder. "A child," Maren whispered. Luca's expression shut down, but not fast enough. She saw it. The wound. "Marianne had the baby," Maren said. Luca did not answer. "Luca." His voice was almost too quiet to hear. "A girl." Maren's throat tightened. "Where is she?" "Safe." "Does Celeste know?" His silence answered. Everything clicked with brutal clarity. "The engagement," Maren said. "Celeste's family knows about the child. They found proof she exists. Not her location. They offered silence in exchange for marriage, access to my ports, and my name beside theirs. And you agreed. I agreed to keep a child breathing." The anger Maren had carried toward him shifted into something complicated and painful. Not forgiveness, not trust, understanding. "And last night," she said, "when I appeared using Marianne's name, someone threatened the only secret I have left." Maren looked at him. "Do I look like her?" Luca's eyes rested on her face for too long. "Yes." The honesty was a blade. Maren stepped back. "Is that why you protected me?" "No. Don't lie." He moved toward her, then stopped himself, hands at his sides. "At first, I thought you were part of it," he said. "Then I saw your face when Celeste humiliated you. You weren't acting. I know performance. I live surrounded by it. That wasn't performance." Maren's eyes burned. "And now?" His control thinned, just enough for her to see the hunger underneath. "Now I don't know what you are to me," he said. "And that is becoming a problem." She should have walked away. Instead, she stood there, caught between fear and the terrible warmth of being seen too clearly by a man who could destroy everything he touched. Then, her phone rang. Private number. Maren looked at Luca. He nodded once. She answered on speaker. A woman's voice came through, shaking. "Maren?" Her heart stopped. "Hannah?" "I'm sorry," Hannah whispered. "They said if I didn't call you, they'd hurt the nurse." Maren's blood turned to ice. Luca's expression changed into something lethal. A man took the phone. "Miss Ellis," he said pleasantly. Tell Luca Ravelli the dead woman left something behind. Bring the actress to St. Vibiana's chapel tomorrow night, or the little sister stops needing medical bills." The call ended. For the first time since Maren had met him, Luca Ravelli looked afraid. Not for himself, for her. The chapel had been abandoned for 12 years, tucked between old brick warehouses near the arts district, where luxury lofts watched poverty through industrial windows and pretended not to recognize it. Luca refused to let Maren go. Maren refused to stay behind. Their argument lasted 42 minutes and ended with her saying, "If you lock me in this house, you become exactly what Celeste says you are." That landed. Luca's face went cold, but he gave the order. Now they sat in the back of an SUV under a bridge while rain turned the windshield silver. His men surrounded the block. Drones scanned rooftops. Every exit was mapped, every alley watched. Still, Maren felt fear crawling beneath her ribs. Luca sat beside her, dressed in black, gun hidden somewhere she tried not to think about. His tattoos climbed his throat like smoke. He hadn't spoken in 10 minutes. "You're angry," Maren said. "I'm focused." That's what angry men say when they own guns. His mouth almost curved. Almost. Then it vanished. "If anything goes wrong, you run to Nico," he said. "Not to me, not to your sister's voice, not to anyone calling your name. I'm not a child." "No," he said. "That's why I'm asking instead of ordering." Maren looked at him. In the dim light, he seemed carved from all the things that had hurt him and failed to kill him. "Who is the girl?" she asked softly. Luca's eyes closed for half a second. "Luca." He looked at her. "Her name is Aria." The name changed the air. "How old?" "6." Maren's heart clenched. "She thinks I'm her uncle," Luca said. "I visit once a month. Different cities, different names. She likes strawberry pancakes and hates shoes. She believes guards are drivers, because children will accept almost any lie if adults smile while saying it." His voice remained calm. His hands did not. One was closed into a fist against his thigh. Maren looked down at it. Slowly, carefully, she placed her hand over his. He went completely still. "I'm not doing this for you," she said. "I'm doing it for Hannah, and maybe for Aria." Luca stared at their hands. "Don't make me want things, Maren." Her chest tightened. "What things?" He turned his hand beneath hers, palm up, fingers almost closing around her hand before he stopped. "A life where my touch doesn't ruin what it holds." Before she could answer, his earpiece crackled. Nico's voice came through from the front seat. Movement inside. Luca's face shut down. The moment disappeared. The chapel smelled of dust, rain, and old candles. Moonlight spilled through broken stained glass, painting the floor in fractured colors. Maren walked beside Luca down the center aisle, heart pounding. His men remained outside. That had been the demand. Only Luca and the actress. At the altar, a phone sat on a wooden box. It rang. Luca answered. A man's voice echoed through the chapel speakers. Romantic. "You brought her." "Where is Hannah?" Luca asked. "Alive. For now." Maren's nails dug into her palms. "Open the box," the voice said. Luca did not move. Maren stepped forward. He caught her wrist. "Don't." She looked at him. "My sister." His grip tightened, then loosened. She opened the box. Inside was a stack of photographs. Maren picked up the first. Her body went numb. It was her mother, younger, terrified, standing beside Marianne Veil outside a motel. Another photograph showed Maren as a little girl on a beach, holding a plastic bucket. Another showed her mother receiving an envelope from a woman who looked like Marianne. Luca took the photos from her slowly, his face drained of color. "Maren," he said, "what is this?" The speaker crackled with laughter. "Tell her, Ravelli." Luca looked at the photos, then at Maren. For once, he seemed at a loss for words. The man spoke again. Her mother wasn't a waitress from Fresno. She was a witness handler. She hid Marianne after Matteo died. And when Marianne realized your family would never stop hunting the child, she gave the ledger to Maren's mother. Maren shook her head. "No. "Your mother died in a car accident, didn't she?" the voice asked. Except it wasn't an accident. It was cleanup. Maren felt the chapel tilt. Her mother's old sedan. The rain. The officer at the door. Hannah, crying in the hallway. Maren at 17. Old enough to understand death, but too young to pay for a funeral. Luca reached for her. She stepped back. "You knew?" she whispered. "No." "You knew my mother was connected to this?" "No." The speaker laughed. "He didn't. That's the beauty of it. Luca Ravelli has been protecting one ghost while another was living 3 miles from his clubs." Maren pressed a hand to her mouth. Her entire life rearranged itself into something colder. The acting jobs that vanished. The landlords who suddenly refused leases. The strange man outside Hannah's first hospital. The envelope of cash her mother had hidden in a cookbook, with a note saying, "Only use if they come, not paranoia. Protection." The phone screen lit up. A video call. Hannah appeared on the screen, pale and crying in a hospital bed. A masked man behind her. Maren made a broken sound. Luca's hand shot out, but again he stopped before touching her. The voice said, "The ledger is hidden in something her mother left behind. The actress knows where it is, even if she doesn't know she knows. Bring it to the old Orpheum theater by midnight tomorrow, or both sisters die." The call ended. For one suspended second, nothing moved. Then the chapel windows shattered. Men in black stormed from the side doors. Luca pulled Maren behind the altar as bullets tore through old wood and stone. He fired back with terrifying precision, but the attackers came from everywhere. Dust filled the air. Maren crawled across broken glass, clutching the photographs. Luca moved over her, shielding her with his body as chips of marble struck his shoulder. "Stay down," he ordered. A man rushed from the left. Luca intercepted him, brutal and fast. Maren saw only fragments. Luca's fist, a blade flashing, the attacker falling into the pews. No gore, just violence performed with the cold efficiency of a man who had learned young that mercy could be fatal. Another man grabbed Maren from behind. She screamed. Luca turned. The world slowed. The attacker dragged her backward toward the sacristy door, arm across her throat. Luca raised his gun, but the man pressed a knife to her side. "Drop it," the man hissed. Luca did. The gun hit the chapel floor. Maren looked at Luca, terrified. His eyes were not on the attacker. They were on her. "Close your eyes," he said calmly. "What?" "Close them." She did. A shot cracked from somewhere above. The arm around her went slack. Luca caught her before she fell, pulling her against him as Nico's team flooded the chapel from the balcony. Maren's hands clutched his shirt. For a moment, he held her too tightly, as if the world had tried to take her and something in him had answered no with every weapon it had. His breath touched her hair. "I told you not to make me afraid," he said. She should have pushed him away. Instead, shaking, she whispered, "Then stop making me feel safe." The ledger was in a music box. Maren realized it at dawn. They were back at the safe house. Hannah had been moved again, this time to a private medical floor under Luca's direct control. She was alive, sedated, protected. Maren sat on the floor of Luca's office with a cardboard box from her apartment between her knees. Her mother's things. Most had been packed for years because grief made ordinary objects impossible. Birthday cards, receipts, a faded scarf, a stack of old playbills from theaters Maren had dreamed of performing in, and the music box. Wooden, plain, broken hinge. Her mother had kept it on the dresser. It played a warped version of La Vie en Rose when wound. Maren had never known why. Now, looking at the photographs from the chapel, she noticed Marianne wearing a necklace shaped like a tiny rose. Her hands shook as she lifted the music box. Luca stood across the office, silent. He had not slept. Neither had she. A bandage disappeared beneath his black shirt at the shoulder, but he moved, as if pain had no authority over him. Maren opened the music box. The ballerina inside spun halfway and stopped. She turned it over. Nothing. "There's no ledger," she said, frustration breaking through. "There's nothing. Luca came closer. May I? She handed it to him. His fingers were careful with it, almost reverent. He examined the hinge, the base, the inner lining. Then he pressed the rose carved on the lid. A hidden compartment clicked open. Inside was a microdrive wrapped in yellowed paper. Maren closed her eyes. Her mother's handwriting covered the note. Maren, if you find this, run from every man who says he can protect you, especially if he means it. Her breath shattered. Luca read it over her shoulder and stepped back like the words had struck him. Maren picked up the drive. This is what everyone wants. Yes. What's on it? The names of the men who killed Matteo, the accounts they used, the judges they bought, the routes they sold to the Arden family. If it's real, it destroys Celeste's leverage and starts a war. Maren looked at him. Then use it. It may expose Arya. Then don't. It may be the only way to stop them from hunting you. The words hung between them. Maren laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. So, that's the choice? Your child or me? Luca flinched. It was small, but she saw it. Arya is not my child, he said. She's close enough. Yes. Maren stood, holding the drive. And I'm not your responsibility. His eyes darkened. You became my responsibility the moment I put that ring in your hand. No, you made me your excuse. Maren, you needed a way out of the engagement. I was convenient. Then I looked like your dead sister-in-law. Then I had the ledger. Then my sister became leverage. Every reason you protect me is tied to someone else. That isn't true. Then tell me the reason that is only mine. Silence. Pain moved through his face, then vanished behind control. Maren nodded, tears burning. That's what I thought. She walked past him. This time, he let her go. At sunset, Celeste Arden arrived at the safe house gate in a white Rolls-Royce with no visible security. That alone made everyone nervous. Luca watched her on the security feed. Maren stood beside him, arms crossed, eyes swollen from crying she refused to acknowledge. Celeste stepped out beneath a black umbrella. She looked perfect, untouched by scandal, rain, or conscience. She wants to talk to me, Maren said. No. You don't know that. She came alone because she knows you'll think it means she isn't dangerous. Maren looked at him. Is she? Yes. Then I should hear what she has to say. Luca turned to her. You mistake courage for standing in front of knives, and you mistake protection for deciding no one else gets to stand. Their eyes locked. A muscle worked in his jaw. Finally, he nodded once. 10 minutes, he said. I'm beside you. No, across the room. Maren. Across the room, Luca. He stared at her for a long moment. Then, quietly, fine. Celeste entered the glass living room like a queen visiting a prison. She removed her gloves finger by finger while Maren stood near the fireplace. Luca remained 20 feet away, still as a shadow with a pulse. Celeste smiled at Maren. You look tired. You look disappointed I'm alive. Not disappointed, delayed. Maren's skin prickled. Celeste glanced at Luca. Do you enjoy her mouth, or has it become inconvenient? Luca did not move. Maren said, What do you want? Celeste sighed. To offer you a life. I have one. No, you have debts, a dying sister, a stolen identity, and a man using you as a shield against consequences he created long before you were born. Maren hated that every word was designed to find a bruise. Celeste opened her clutch and removed a document. A settlement. $20 million. Your sister receives lifetime medical care in Switzerland. You disappear under a new name. Luca returns the drive. I tell the world you had a breakdown and we forgive you. Maren stared at the paper. 20 million. Enough to save Hannah. Enough to never audition again. Enough to stop counting groceries in the checkout line. Luca's voice came quietly from across the room. Maren. Celeste's smile widened. Listen to him. He's about to tell you money cannot buy safety. That's a beautiful lie rich men tell poor women so they remain sentimental. Maren looked at the settlement. Her mother's note seemed to burn in her memory. Run from every man who says he can protect you. Celeste stepped closer. He will choose the child over you. He should. She is blood. You are guilt, wearing a pretty face. Luca's control cracked. Enough. Celeste didn't look at him. Ask him, Maren. Ask him what happens if saving you exposes Aria. Maren's fingers tightened around the paper. She looked at Luca. He said nothing. That silence hurt more than the answer. Celeste whispered, "Come with me, and you get to stop being collateral damage." Maren looked at the woman who had humiliated her in a ballroom, threatened her sister, and smiled while offering salvation like a poisoned apple. Then Maren tore the settlement in half. Celeste's smile vanished. "I've been poor my entire adult life," Maren said. "Do you know what poor women learn first?" Celeste's eyes narrowed. "We learn the difference between help and ownership." She dropped the torn contract at Celeste's feet. Celeste looked at her for a long moment. Then she laughed once, soft, cold. Then die expensive. She turned to leave. At the door, she paused and looked back at Luca. "My father sends his regards. Midnight, Orpheum Theater. Bring the drive, the actress, and your sentimental conscience." When she was gone, Maren stood very still. Luca crossed the room. She lifted a hand before he could touch her. "No." He stopped. "You would choose Aria," she said. His face tightened. "Yes." The honesty destroyed her. Maren nodded slowly. "Good." Luca's eyes searched hers. "She's 6, Maren whispered. "You should choose her." "Maren, but don't ask me to pretend it doesn't hurt." That was when Luca broke. Not fully, not loudly, but enough. He stepped closer and sank to one knee in front of her. Maren froze. The most feared man in Los Angeles knelt on the black stone floor, rain sliding down the windows behind him, head bowed, like something inside him had finally become too heavy to carry standing up. "I have chosen duty my whole life," he said. "Family, blood, survival, revenge. I chose the child because my brother cannot. I chose power because weakness buried everyone I loved. I chose that ring because Celeste put a knife against a little girl's throat and called it business." His voice roughened. "Then you stood in a ballroom with champagne on your dress and no one beside you. And for 1 second, I chose without strategy." Maren's heart ached. Luca looked up. "I chose you before I understood why," he said. "That is the truth that belongs only to you." Tears slipped down her face. He lifted his hand, then stopped before touching her. Always that restraint. Always that almost. This time, Maren stepped into his reach. His hand came to her cheek, like he expected the world to punish him for it. She closed her eyes. The touch was warm, controlled, reverent in a way that hurt. "You terrify me," she whispered. "I should. I don't trust you. You shouldn't. I need you." His eyes darkened with something close to pain. "That," he said, "is the part I don't know how to survive." The Orpheum Theater had been closed since the 80s. Its golden ceiling cracked, its velvet seats rotting, its stage still beautiful in the way ruined things could be beautiful when no one expected them to live again. At midnight, it glowed with emergency lights and danger. Maren stood beside Luca under the marquee, wearing a black coat over body armor, so thin it felt useless. The microdrive rested inside a hidden seam near her waist. Luca had argued against that too. She had won, by reminding him that no one expected the actress to carry the truth. Inside, Celeste waited on stage with her father, Richard Arden, a silver-haired billionaire whose smile looked expensive enough to be legal. Men with weapons lined the balconies. Others stood near the exits. Hannah sat in a wheelchair near the orchestra pit, pale but alive, a guard behind her. Maren's knees nearly gave out. "Hannah," she breathed. Her sister's eyes filled. "I'm sorry." "Don't," Maren called. "You did nothing wrong." Richard Arden clapped slowly. "Touching," he said. "I always admire loyalty among people who can't afford it." Luca's voice was calm. "Let the girl go." Richard smiled. "Give me the drive." "After." "Before." Luca looked at Celeste. "You brought your father to negotiate for you?" Celeste's face hardened. Richard chuckled. "My daughter was embarrassed, Luca. That made her emotional. I'm here to restore order. Maren looked at Celeste and saw it then. The flicker, not guilt. Rage, not at Maren, at being dismissed. Luca saw it too. Order, Luca said, is what men like you call fear when you profit from it. Richard's smile faded. Maren stepped forward. Every weapon shifted toward her. Luca's hand caught her wrist. She glanced back. Trust me. His jaw clenched. Then he let go. Maren walked down the aisle alone, heart pounding so hard she felt each beat in her teeth. She stopped 10 feet from the stage. I have the drive, she said. Richard's eyes brightened. Maren, Hannah whispered. Maren kept her gaze on Richard. But before I give it to you, I want to know something. Richard sighed. This isn't an audition, Miss Ellis. No, she said. It's the first honest scene I've ever been paid for. Celeste's eyes narrowed. Maren turned slightly, making sure the hidden camera in her coat button faced the stage. Luca's people had patched it into every major gossip site, news desk, and private screen connected to Arden Foundation donors. If it worked, the world was watching. If it didn't, they were dead. My mother died because of this drive, Maren said. Marianne Veil died because of this drive. Matteo Ravelli died because of it. Why? Richard's face went flat. Because idealists are expensive. Meaning? Meaning your mother could have taken money and lived. Marianne could have stayed quiet and raised her child. Matteo could have married where he was told. People die when they confuse love with leverage. Luca moved slightly behind her. One of Richard's men lifted his gun. Luca stopped. Maren forced herself not to look back. And Arya? She asked. A 6-year-old girl was leveraged too? Richard smiled again. Children are the purest form. Luca's control snapped. The theater seemed to feel it. A shift in the air. A gathering storm. Celeste looked at her father. Stop talking. Richard ignored her. Give me the drive, Miss Ellis, and your sister lives. Continue this moral performance, and I'll leave both of you in this lovely old theater with the rest of Los Angeles history. Maren reached into her coat. Luca's voice came low behind her. Maren. She pulled out the drive. Richard extended his hand. Instead of giving it to him, Maren dropped it into the glass of whiskey sitting on the edge of the stage. Richard's expression emptied. No, he said. Maren lifted her chin. You wanted the original. Behind her, Luca said calmly, he has copies. Every screen in the theater lit up. Balcony monitors, old projection screens, phones in guards' hands. The live stream played Richard's confession on repeat. Because Luca had never intended to trade evidence. He intended to bury the Arden family in public. Richard turned slowly toward Celeste. You knew? He whispered. Celeste stared at the screens, face pale. No, she said, but I should have. Then the first shot came from the balcony. Chaos erupted. Luca reached Maren before she hit the floor, covering her body with his, as bullets tore through the seats. His men stormed from hidden entrances, black shapes moving through red theater light. Celeste screamed at her father. Hannah's guard raised a gun toward Maren. Maren saw it. So did Luca. He lunged. The shot struck his shoulder instead of her chest. Maren screamed his name. Luca staggered but did not fall. He moved forward with terrifying force, disarming the guard and pulling Hannah behind him. Blood darkened his black shirt, almost invisible except where it shone under the stage lights. Maren crawled to Hannah, grabbing her sister's face. I can call a rideshare, Grace said. Roman's expression did not change. You can. Across the stage, Richard Arden dragged Celeste in front of him as a shield. Call them off, he shouted. Luca turned toward him, wounded, breathing hard, eyes cold enough to stop blood. Celeste went very still. Her father's arm locked around her throat. For the first time all night, she looked afraid. Maren saw it. The heiress who had humiliated her, the woman who had threatened her sister, the villain in diamonds, afraid of the same man who had taught her love, was just another contract. Richard pressed a gun to Celeste's side. Call them off, Ravelli, or she dies. Luca raised his weapon. Celeste's eyes met Maren's. There was hatred there, but there was something else too. Recognition. Maren stood. Luca snapped. Maren, down. She didn't listen. She walked toward the stage slowly, hands visible. Richard swung the gun toward her. Stupid girl. Yes, Maren said. People keep underestimating that. Celeste's fingers moved slightly, pointing down. There was a fallen stage light near Richard's foot, its cord tangled. Maren understood. She took one more step. Richard aimed at her. Celeste drove her heel into the cord and yanked. The stage light crashed down, exploding against the floor. Richard flinched. Luca fired once, striking the gun from Richard's hand. Nico tackled him from behind. Celeste fell to her knees. Maren rushed to Luca. He was still standing, because of course he was. Because men like him treated bleeding like a scheduling conflict. Then his knees buckled. Maren caught him badly, both of them sinking to the theater floor under raining dust and golden light. No, she said, pressing her hands to his shoulder. No, no, no. Luca looked up at her, breath uneven. You're giving orders now? You're not dying in a theater. That's dramatic even for you. His mouth curved faintly. Maren started crying. He lifted his bloodied hand toward her face, then hesitated. Even now, even wounded, still asking without words. She grabbed his hand and pressed it to her cheek. His eyes softened in a way she had never seen. I was afraid, he whispered. I know. No, he said. Not of dying. Her tears fell onto his fingers. Of leaving you in a room where no one comes for you. Maren bent over him, forehead touching his. I came for you too, she whispered. Outside, sirens rose. Cameras hovered. The city watched the empire burn. 3 weeks later, Los Angeles pretended it had always hated the Arden family. That was how powerful people survived shame. They revised their loyalties and called it morality. Richard Arden was arrested before sunrise. His offshore accounts hit the news by breakfast. Judges resigned. Police chiefs vanished on sudden medical leave. Donors returned money they had known was dirty, only after the cameras found it. Celeste disappeared for 9 days. When she resurfaced, she gave testimony against her father through an attorney and left the country by private jet. No apology. No confession of guilt beyond what benefited her. Maren did not forgive her, but she understood one thing. Sometimes monsters were raised by larger monsters and still chose, once, not to become them completely. Hannah recovered on a private floor with ocean views and complained daily that the soup was too expensive to taste that bland. Luca paid for everything. Maren argued with him for exactly 4 days before Hannah said, I'm sick, not stupid. Let the scary man buy medicine. The world still called Maren Luca's mistress, then his girlfriend, then his weakness. Then, after a photo leaked of him sitting outside Hannah's hospital room at 3 a.m. with blood still under his fingernails, and a paperback Maren had left in his lap, the internet called him something worse. In love. Maren didn't see Luca for 6 days after he left the hospital. He sent guards. He sent updates. He sent a doctor when Hannah coughed. He sent her apartment furniture from storage after the bullet damage was repaired. He did not come himself. On the 7th night, Maren found him outside her building in the rain. Not in an SUV. Standing beside one. Black coat, dark hair wet, one arm still in a sling beneath the coat, though he looked irritated by the concept of injury. The streetlights turned the rain gold around him. Maren stood under the awning in sweatpants and an old sweater. You know, she said, most men text. I'm not most men, I've noticed. He looked up at her apartment window. Your landlord agreed to install better locks. You threatened him? I educated him. Luca. He raised your rent after the shooting. He did. I unraised it. Maren tried not to smile. Failed a little. Silence settled between them, softer than before. He looked at her like he was memorizing how distance worked. I stayed away, he said, because I wanted to know if I could. And I can. Her heart sank before she could stop it. Then he stepped closer. I just don't want to. Rain ran down his face. He looked less untouchable here, beneath her broken awning, on a street with cracked sidewalks and overflowing trash bins. Still dangerous, still powerful, but human in the exact way she had once thought impossible. Maren crossed her arms. I'm not moving into your glass fortress. I know. I'm not becoming your possession. I know. I still don't trust easily. You shouldn't. And I'm not wearing a ring just because you put one in my hand during a public meltdown. Luca's eyes lowered. For the first time, he looked almost ashamed. I should not have done that to you. Maren blinked. He removed something from his coat pocket. The black platinum ring. The same one. He held it out, not as a claim this time, but as evidence. I used you that night, he said. Then I protected you. Then I needed you. Then I loved you. Not in the order a decent man should. Maren's throat tightened. I am still not decent, he continued. I have enemies. I have blood on my name. I have a child hidden from the world who will always come first, because she has no one else standing between her and men like Arden. Good. His eyes searched hers. Maren stepped off the curb into the rain. But if you ever put a camera in my bedroom again, I'll stab you with something sharper than a kitchen knife. His mouth moved. A real smile almost appeared. I deserve that. You do. And if I ask to walk beside you? She looked at the ring in his palm. What? Then at his face. No rings, she said. He closed his fist around it without argument. No rings. No ownership. No ownership. No deciding my life because you're scared. His gaze deepened. I will fail at that, he said, but I will let you call me on it. That's not romantic. It's honest. Maren looked at this man who had destroyed her life, saved it, complicated it, and somehow become the person she looked for in every dangerous room. Then she took his uninjured hand. Not because cameras watched, there were none. Not because scandal demanded it. The headlines had already moved on. Not because she was trapped. For the first time since the gala, every door behind her was unlocked. Luca looked down at their joined hands, like he did not trust beauty when it arrived quietly. Maren stepped closer. You can walk me upstairs, she said. That's all. His thumb brushed once over her knuckles. Restrained, careful, reverent. For tonight, he said. For tonight. He walked her upstairs through the narrow hallway that smelled like rain and old paint. Mrs. Alvarez opened her door 2 inches, saw Luca, saw their hands, and nodded, as if approving a treaty between unstable nations. At Maren's door, he stopped. She unlocked it, then turned. The apartment behind her was still small, still imperfect. The window had been replaced. The bullet holes were patched but visible beneath fresh paint if someone knew where to look. Luca noticed. His expression darkened. Maren touched his chest lightly, stopping the storm before it started. I'm okay. He looked down at her hand. You say that too easily. So do you. Outside, thunder moved over Los Angeles. Inside, they stood in the fragile quiet after violence, after scandal, after every lie had burned down around them. Luca lifted his hand to her face. This time he didn't stop halfway. This time she didn't flinch. His palm rested against her cheek, warm and steady. I don't know how to love without protecting, he said. Maren leaned into his touch. Then learn how to protect without owning. His eyes closed for a second. When he opened them, something had changed, not softened, deepened. I will, he said. Maren believed him, not completely, not blindly, but enough to open the door wider. Months later, the world would still argue about what happened that night at the Valencia Grand. Some said Maren Ellis ruined an engagement. Some said Luca Ravelli staged the greatest public betrayal in Los Angeles history. Some said Celeste Arden lost an empire because she underestimated a woman in a borrowed dress. But the people who mattered knew the truth was stranger. A broke actress walked into a ballroom, pretending to be someone else. A mafia boss looked across a room full of predators and saw the one person who had not learned how to be cruel. He put a ring in her hand for the wrong reasons, then spent the rest of his life proving he could love her for the right ones. And on nights when Los Angeles turned silver with rain, Luca Ravelli still parked outside Maren Ellis's apartment, not because she needed guarding, not because he owned her, and not because the city was safe. He stayed because once, in a room full of people laughing at her pain, no one had come for her, and he had promised himself that would never happen again.